Don't go to the tunnel at 3 a.m. The first person to say it aloud was an elderly woman at the bakery. Don't go to the tunnel at 3 a.m. She said it with a soft certainty, the kind that makes strangers feel like family histories. I laughed with the ease of someone who still believes rules are for other people's ghosts. Evelyn was my name, the sort that reads maps for comfort, and the tunnel was an old brick mouth at the edge of town, humming with a silence that felt intentional. Curiosity, like rain, lets itself in through the smallest crack. 2 days later, I found a tarnished brass pocket watch half buried beside the tunnel, its face frozen on 3 o'clock. It wasn't mine, not yet. I carried it, as if handling someone else's memory. The chain hummed between my fingers. The townspeople shifted when I mentioned it. They gave answers shaped like questions. That night, the watch warmed in my palm, and I decided to learn what the warnings were trying to hide. The tunnel smelled of river and old coal, a breath from an older town. My footsteps felt theatrical there, as if the bricks expected an audience. At first, it was small, echoes that didn't match my pace, the slight delay in a footstep answering 2 beats later. I told myself those were tricks, sound playing to board walls. Still, every time I moved, the smaller sounds bent around me, forming a rhythm that belonged to someone else, someone waiting for the clock to finish its slow turn. By the third night, the town's quiet multiplied into something watchful. Chalk marks began to appear on the tunnel wall, simple lines at first, then hesitant symbols like a language half remembered. My notebook filled with sketches, a crooked spiral, a clock hand that didn't exist. I left a recording app on my phone for 3 nights in a row. Each morning, there would be a single new file, a minute of static, and an indistinct cadence, like someone practicing the wrong beat of a song. The watch, stubborn as a bad habit, always seemed attuned to those markings. It warmed when I passed the chalk and cooled when I stepped away. Once, at 2:57, it vibrated against my palm, though it had no mechanism to do so. I laughed then too. Laughter has been a poor shield. Layers of minutes folded over one another until I could no longer tell which footsteps belonged to me and which belonged to a memory trying on my boots, making them fit a little too well. Someone else had left a mark on me as well, the memory of hearing my own voice where it shouldn't be, a whisper that finished my sentences, an answer that mirrored my fears. I began to set small experiments, drop pebbles in a line, leave the lantern, step back. When the clock counted down, the tunnel answered with small, patient remakes of my actions. It wasn't an imitation so much as a conversation in which the other person always came in late, apologizing for the delay. I found the old woman again on a hill that smelled of wet grass. She didn't raise her eyebrows at me this time. "It keeps its hours," she said, like a factual thing you could check on a calendar. She warned that time there was a river with eddies, people slip into them and come back wearing other people's afternoons. Her eyes were spare of nonsense. She watched me as if she wanted to know whether I was stubborn enough to be interesting or just careless enough to be useful. On a night when the moon smeared itself thin, I set a camera on a tripod inside the mouth and marked a starting point with chalk. I put my hand on the pocket watch at 2:59 and left a voice recording running. My breathing sounded foolish in the open mouth of the tunnel. I remember thinking that if anything happened, At least there would be a record. Someone, someday, could look at the footage and say what I couldn't. That curiosity had been kind, even if reckless. At 3:00 exactly, the air shifted as if a hand had rearranged notes on a music stand. The watch stopped at the exact second and seemed to hold that moment like water in a cupped hand. The recording later captured only a hollow hush, and then, underneath, a sequence of tiny sounds that matched the cadence of my childhood lullaby, the one my mother hummed when I broke a plate. Humming in a place that hadn't known my house made my stomach feel like a borrowed room. I stepped deeper, and for a moment, there were too many Eves, images of me lagging in the corner of my eye, looking at themselves as if rehearsing. I couldn't tell whether they were future versions or reflections made from regret. One of them touched her forehead the way I do when I try to remember a forgotten name, and I felt the reflexive urge to answer her, to explain where I'd been. The tunnel accepted my words like a ledger and wrote back only in the soft language of delay. At the far end, where the light thinned to paper, there was a suggestion of a doorway that shouldn't have been there, a seam in the bricks like a held breath. It felt less like an exit and more like a choice window. Step through and accept a rearranged afternoon, or step back and live with the knowledge of the other doors you didn't open. I hesitated with my palm on the cold seam, the watch heavy and warm in my pocket. The town's rules felt less like advice and more like interventions by an economy I couldn't afford to ignore. I chose a middle thing. I stepped partway in and then climbed back out as if pulling loose a splinter. The sensation was of two breaths at once, one mine, one borrowed. When I stepped into the street again, the watch had moved, its hands jittered, and then settled at a different hour, unfamiliar but not random. The town carried on with ordinary Sunday faces. I told people about the seam and the echoes and the way the watch had hummed, and they nodded as if the weather had been unusual. Their nods felt like sympathetic knots, tied around something fragile. Days became a ledger I couldn't balance. My notebook filled with attempts to explain time with ink diagrams, crude clocks, a list of what I'd heard. The camera footage was mercifully ambiguous. Gaps where I remembered standing, frames that showed nothing but a smear of light. On a Tuesday, I awoke with chalk on my fingers and a line of dried mud on my shoe, though I was certain I'd slept at home. The watch sat at the foot of my bed like a compact judge, patient and mute. I wrote the words I'd been told and the words I'd come to know in a last inked page, and pinned it to the bakery's notice board. Don't go to the tunnel at 3 a.m. It read like a translation of a feeling into paper. That night, as if the sentence had called something in, a soft knock came at my door at 3:00. Not a demand, but a polite adjustment, like a visitor who had traveled through other people's afternoons to find this one. I opened, and there was only a shadow that moved one beat after I did, smiling with the patient expression of someone who keeps time for others.